Hello.
Oh, hey, okay. There we go. Yeah. I got 50 tabs open, and I hear it's still going in the background of one. And it turns out the intro is done here. We are officially live on YouTube, live on Rumble, live on Locals, and now live on Twitter. I like dead naming it. I'm sorry. How's everybody doing?
Doing good.
Good. Hopefully we have audience from everywhere. And we're going to, let's see. We're going to keep things light and simple. We'll talk about everything but Russell Brand.
Yeah, right.
No one has an opinion anyways.
Yeah. Who would want to talk about that anyway?
Yeah, no. Okay, so let's break my first statement. And who is deepest into the Russell Brand story? I feel like there are two stories, and everybody correct me if I'm wrong. One is, did the guy do this? And then the other one is, what is happening and why is it coming out now? And is there a conspiracy aspect of it, or is there a government collusion aspect of it? Why now? Would be the two stories. Do you guys see that, or do you think there's more?
No, I think that's a fair approach. Although I don't know much about the second one because I haven't looked into that. But yeah, no, that seems like a fair approach. Why now is actually a really good question. Do you have any idea as to why now?
Well, I know Kurt is probably his number one fan, so I'm going to go to Kurt. Do you have any theories as to why now?
No, I'm not particularly keeping super track of the story. Russell Brand is a person who is eccentric. He's eclectic. He is certainly historically was known as a womanizer. Apparently was, named Shagger of the Year by various outlets within the UK media apparatus. So he had this reputation as a womanizing Lothario. Apparently had people going out into crowds to find women to sleep with him, which I totally believe is a thing that absolutely happened. In his later years has been a little bit more reserved and undergone a bit of a change, gone to rehab and, has a wife and children and is leading a more traditional life, although he's still a very enigmatic figure and eclectic. He's inimitable style is very sort of notable. I don't really know why it's happening. It's like we just need another target, another person to find a story behind. The messages are vague. They seem to be cobbled together. They don't seem to be the originals. What's been put together, and the most interesting and disturbing thing for me was the UK sending this letter to Rumble. I was like, that is like, really?
And
it's like this letter, will you join YouTube and demonetizing them? I was like, serious?
No, and TikTok and X,
that to me was the most disturbing thing of the story so far.
Well, like her, and TikTok and X and Facebook, they sent it, or she sent it to all of them.
Okay, I missed that part of the memo.
No problem. Andrea, does this at all remind you of Marilyn Manson?
It reminds me of Marilyn Manson in a lot of ways, mainly just because there's so much overlap between the public persona and now the accusations that are coming forward, right? And so when somebody has a shocker type of public persona, then you already have so many, expectations and biases about that person. So I think there's a lot of confirmation bias that's going on in this particular case. Now, having said that, I've been aware of Russell Brand since maybe a year before he married Katy Perry, a while. He was a radical socialist back when he came on my radar. And my bias, I'll be perfectly frank about it. The guy creeps me out. I would never be in a room alone with him. I think he's, just gross, not to my taste at all. But see, for me, that's all the more reason why I need to be skeptical of these allegations, because they're just, it's easy to be lazy when things will just confirm what you already think about something. It's easy to get into these mental shortcuts of, oh yeah, well that sounds about right, and then you're just kind of done with it. So we live in an era where it's harder and harder to be principled and to really apply your standards to the people that you don't like. And I think that's also kind of a big feature of these types of stories, these types of things coming out, is that if somebody is controversial, like a Marilyn Manson or like a Russell Brand, they just aren't getting the benefit of the doubt with things like let due process play out, let him have his say even, not every opinion about somebody has to be litigated in a courtroom, but these are very serious accusations that are being made. And we haven't even, at this point heard his side of the story yet. So just a big rush to judgment that's kind of just seems to be a big part of the discourse today that's troubling to me personally.
I agree. No, Steve, do you feel like we're lumping too many things in together and it really needs to be parsed out for each thing to actually be addressed?
Well, I mean, in theory, you want to do that, right? But like Andrea said, in natural tendencies, a shortcut. Now, following on something she said, and you said earlier, so they demonetize him on YouTube, right? But they're still going to show his videos. That's what demonetize means. So it's okay to have this dude up here. He's terrible, but let's take the money. Now,
they'll get money from it. They just won't share it with them.
Yeah, exactly. And if he's going to be liable eventually because he did this stuff, then that's less assets he has for the victims. So YouTube is taking money from the victims if they are in fact victims. But that's pretty that would make me even more cynical if that's possible without overdosing, to watch them just keep his money but still broadcasting what he's doing and then claim they're on some high horse of morality. That's silly.
Now, I don't know, and I don't want to speculate too far on the demonetization. Somebody needs to watch his videos on YouTube and see if, in incognito mode, and do they actually get served ads? If they don't get served ads, then technically maybe not, but it could still be argued that it's still bringing eyeballs to the platform for other videos that they are in fact monetizing. So I just want to be really clear on the, what money is being made off of him or not off of him. It could be just his status that's bringing people into other videos. Any thoughts on that?
Oh,
my biggest thing with all of this is I think it gets lost sort of in this. First of all, the UK sending the letter is absolutely ridiculous. Whether they send it to one platform or 100 platforms, it's absolutely ridiculous for a government to be stepping in here. But right now, YouTube, owned by Google, is still a private platform. Freedom, you don't have the right to freedom of speech and all that stuff. And like I was saying before we went live, even if, in a judicial tenure sort of situation, it's not only like a bias or an impropriety, but also the appearance of. Now, I don't know if that's in YouTube's contracts, that, if there's the impropriety or the appearance of some sort of bad act, then we're going to pull you. But at the end of the day, it's YouTube is a private company. So we have to respect their ability to pull him down. What I don't like is everyone else automatically assuming he's guilty because of the allegations.
Cool question, though. I would agree with you on the YouTube because YouTube initiated it themselves.
Yeah.
However, and I'm going to ask Kurt here because he likes to get in the weeds. What about the being a state actor? So as soon as that letter went out to all the other social platforms, now this is UK, not the US, so I understand that there may be some differences, but if YouTube had received a letter ahead of time, I don't know that they did. I'll assume that they just were proud of themselves and said, we're going to spank him and it's all right. But if they did get a letter like these other companies did, and then they act, are they not in fact a state actor or acting as a state actor in that case? And then don't we then have a problem with the private company, government, etc.?
I don't think so. We fought a war mostly so we don't have to listen to that particular state actor. So the fact that they choose to listen to them, I'm not sure raises a state actor problem for the purposes of a legal analysis.
But from what I understand, there is something in the UK that is similar, a similar law like we have here. So I don't know. I wish I had a UK person on. There's a Twitter thread that I asked, and they said that there were some laws against it, but
yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether or not it would be a state actor. Because based on my very limited understanding, it seems comparable to like a letter from a congressperson or even a committee, which wouldn't normally trigger a state actor analysis because the committee is not the state because they don't have power to do anything by themselves.
Part of like the cultural commission, so it is actually enacting, I believe.
Yeah, in the UK system, because of their system, that their legislature is also acting in executive roles. That's true. So that might be true. So you might have me on that one. I'd have to actually dive into it. Although from YouTube's point of view, I just ignore it because why am I listening to the UK? I don't want to listen to the UK. Screw them.
How is this compared to, say, the FBI sending Facebook and Twitter messages saying, pull down these particular...
See, that's a lot different. Yeah. Because now you have an executive branch official that's acting as opposed to a congressional committee. And that's why in the UK, because of the nature of their government, that you can blend these roles. Because, the Parliament, the House of Commons, the members of the House of Commons are also executive branch officials because they are minister of, and insert the blank. So, the Minister of Foreign Affairs is the Secretary of State, which is an executive branch role, but they're in the legislature because that's how they roll over there. So they have these blending of the executive and legislative roles. So it gets a little bit more complicated. In the US, like if just some random committee sends a letter, it's be like, okay, whatever. If it's the FBI as an executive branch official, then that's a state action problem because you're now cooperating. You're now taking direction from someone who has the ability to actually like enforce the law because they've been empowered by it. And so now that presents a state action problem.
Okay, and I agree with the chat. Anybody who knows Black Belt Bannister, please have him tag me. I'll happily hear from him.
Yeah, he would be the best person to ask on this question on the UK specified law.
Yeah,
it would be great.
Fantastic.
So can we talk about the fact that the one of the authors of the article against Russell Brand was actually successfully sued for libel?
Sure.
Yeah, that's nice.
Well,
in
that's
some
one of
other
the biggest
context?
reasons why you don't make a determination
UK?
based off of allegations.
See, that's the thing. It's very hard to be in this position. There are a couple of different things going on here. So Russell Brand has successfully won lawsuits in the past against the Guardian, I think, and the Sun, 2 different publications. And I think that there were rape allegations, actually, at least in one of them.
We don't say that word on YouTube, though.
Grape allegations, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
My apologies.
But yes, I've heard about that. Not the specifics, but I do know that he's known as very, very litigious, which in his position he may need to be. But okay, so that's one of the lawsuits. This one is what, about something with his cheating on his girlfriend? Interesting. Wow.
Well, he's a
I'm
public
surprised
figure.
people sue on that, but
I'm not the biggest fan of Russell Brand, but he is a public figure, and because he has money and he's a celebrity, he will certainly be targeted by people who want to tarnish his name, people who want to make money off of him. That makes perfect sense. And so, although I didn't include... So I sent a couple of links to previous lawsuits that he's won. But the thing is that he's also been written about by this woman named Charlotte Wace. She was one of the 2 authors of this article that came out. And she was sued for libel because she destroyed a woman's business, a woman named Danielle Hunley.
Interesting.
She's done that multiple
she was
times.
a beautician. Yeah, she was a beautician, and she wrote this article about illegal beauticians. What are they calling them? Chemical cowboys, and or something along those lines. And she just flat out said this woman received this procedure, this dangerous chemical procedure from this woman. She doesn't do them, hinting that she wasn't qualified to be doing the work that she was doing when she's actually fully qualified. They admitted to wrongdoing. They printed like one of these retractions in like the bottom right hand corner of page 27
on the 8th page.
And she said that's not good enough. Sued them And even though they knew they were wrong, they still made her go through the entire process, and she got a judgment against the newspaper for destroying her career, her health, her business, her son's health. Her son was getting bullied at school, etc. It's just the newspaper flat out admitted they were wrong in the facts. They had to print a big retraction, which is still up on their website. And she's the woman that is behind this latest article.
She's the
By the way,
co-author.
I like that I think that is part of the settlement or judgment, right? That they have to leave these retractions up on the website, very clear and findable, etc.
And it's several paragraphs at the beginning of the article.
Good. I mean, I feel like there's more of that should happen because, as you mentioned, the apology or correction on page 8 is not very helpful when nobody reads past page 1 or 2.
Right.
Well, see,
they had originally
go ahead,
agreed it was going to be on page 2. It was actually something that there was, I believe, like a union or something that she didn't go after legal action at first, but they agreed it would be on page 2, and then the newspaper was like, "Oh, we have this really big story, and can we just move it?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem," without consulting her, without letting her know, and they didn't apologize in their statement either. Even though they had printed blatant lies about her. And it was a really big problem for her. It destroyed her business. It destroyed her life. And considering, the thing is that I'm not necessarily sitting here and saying that the people who made allegations against Russell Brand are being dishonest. But when I see something like that with one of these journalists, my question is, why would you hire somebody who has a history of being liable for libel? That doesn't make sense to me.
That was the thing. If I can, that was the thing. I was getting beat up on Twitter yesterday about it because people were saying, "Well, you have to believe this article." I said, "Well, why do we have to believe this article?" Because newspapers don't want to be sued. They would have fully vetted this whole entire process. You know how litigious entertainment lawyers are. So clearly, they would have gone through 845 lawyers. It would have been fully vetted and fact checked. They wouldn't have published this unless they were absolutely sure of their sources. Yet the person that wrote this article is the person who just 2.5 years ago had their paper successfully sued for an article they wrote. So that's why
their
you
language
can't
does seem to be
believe
a bit more cautious, though, this time around. It does seem to be a little bit more guarded, a little bit more cautious, and they're avoiding using certain words. So I think they've been once bitten, twice shy.
This first article, though, she did the same thing. She investigated all these places. She conducted these. She looked at documents. She went undercover in this woman's salon for 45 minutes and still accused her of all of these horribly wrong things. That's why you should never just take it for read that whatever a reporter is saying to you is true. Okay, they say they saw the medical reports. How the hell do I know they saw the medical reports?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges I've had with some of the takes on this and the journalism side of it is that, and this is a point I made in a conversation I had with Colonel Kurtz a few days ago, which is that, when a journalist tells you they confirm something, you don't have any idea what that means. I mean, that can mean anything at all. When evidence is admitted in court, you have very specific written standards that are transparent. Everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows, okay, it has to be authenticated. Here's how you establish the foundation for thing. It has to meet basic criteria of reliability and so forth. So for that to make it into a courtroom, it's cleared these certain hurdles. For a journalist to say, well, I confirmed this, you don't know what that means. You don't know if that means that they asked somebody who said, yeah, she told me that too, and you treat it as confirmation. You don't know if they've seen the text messages in their native format, or if they just confirmed, oh, well, this looks like Russell Brand's number, so it must be legit. It's just, it can be anything at all. And so in the era where we've got such problems with being able to trust the mainstream media for fact reporting, that lack of transparency is just a real problem for being able to credit these types of allegations.
Yeah, and like I say all the time to my clients when they're getting sued or when there's a countersuit or something, I don't care what they allege in the complaint because the allegations don't matter. What matters is what they can prove and what evidence they have that supports their allegations. And if the evidence is not admissible, if it's not credible, if it's not reliable, then it doesn't matter. And so let's not judge now was what I was trying to push out there on Twitter. Let's look at the evidence and actually what it has to say.
But now we have the
I
media
agree
acting as a
that's-
fourth branch of government, essentially. And people deciding
Yeah.
whether he's guilty or whether
well.
he's innocent based on their own predispositions towards, oh, well, I always thought he was creepy. I've always thought he was creepy, too. He actually looks a lot like my ex-boyfriend, who I didn't really, who I don't have very good memories of. But you know what? I don't hold that against him. He's, got whatever going on. I'm sure there were a lot of women who willingly slept with him. I don't know if he committed these crimes. He might have, he might not have, but we weren't there.
It's actually worse than just the media trying to act like the fourth branch of government, because it's kind of reaching the point where it feels like the media is attempting to replace or subvert the justice system as an adjudication of truth and as a provider of remedies, as a place to go to for recourse. Now, I'm not going to be somebody to sit up here and suggest, oh, the legal system is perfect. The justice you get out of the legal system is perfect. No, it's very flawed, but it's that way by design because of the values that we have, such as, better for 100 guilty people to go free than an innocent person to be in prison, just for an example. You don't have that kind of grace and those kind of values in the media. And part of what's disturbing about it is that the media, with these lynch type of campaigns, this cancel culture that follows on the heels of these types of stories, that is arguably in many ways a lot more effective than the type of recourse you might get if you do go to a court and get your judgment or whatever. So that's disturbing, the way that the media is positioning itself as really subverting the judicial process.
Well,
I'm
Andrea, let's take
with
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I'm okay with people being judged in the media and all of that, as opposed to the legal system. I think the legal system sometimes is weaponized too much. I'm okay with that. What I have a problem with is it's the societal tendency to automatically convict somebody based off of an allegation. That's the fundamental problem I have.
Did we talk about the UK Parliament letter before I got here?
Briefly.
And we'll get into it. There's a second thing, though, to continue on with this last.
Yeah, I was just going to say that goes beyond what Andrea was saying. Now it's actually gone the other way, where it's the government telling the media what to do.
Yeah,
sure.
But you've already talked about it, so I'll shut up.
We're also not talking about the fact that Channel 4 is who broke the story along with the Times, and they omitted the fact that he worked for Channel 4 for several years and have now themselves had to come out and say, we're internally investigating what was going on. So that's kind of a weird one too. It kind of makes me wonder if they even know what's going on in their own organization. They really definitely did seem to want to get this story out in a specific time. I don't know what the exact timing is, but it does feel coordinated. Again, I'm not saying that it's not untrue. I'm not going to automatically say the accusers that nothing did happen. I'm not going to say any of that. I feel like there's, again, circling back, two stories.
It could be
One
both,
is
Eric.
a guy is accused. Yeah, two things can be true at once. Guy is accused of a bunch of stuff, but there is a definite, definitive, coordinated effort. And yes, Jeff, to what you were saying, not only the letters to Rumble and Twitter and TikTok and Facebook, but also to the broadcaster. I forgot which network, where that woman said that Russell Brand is a hero. They literally wrote another letter, and there's a highlight part of it going around saying, you have this employee on staff who is saying this. They can't be saying that. That's disturbing.
Yeah. And the real concern trolling way it's written is just so it's so reprehensible. Will you take the same bold pizzazz position as YouTube? We can't help noticing these scurrilous accusations. What is your stance on the issue? It's just written in this really mealy mouth style. It's almost pathetic.
Ironically, somebody pointed out it's GB News, and that's where Dan Wooten works as well, who coincidentally has been up. But are there letters being written about Dan Wooten? Are there letters? Yeah, this is some really disturbing stuff. And Nate, the lawyer, by the way, to the panel, is saying about it being an echo chamber, because I guarantee if Nate was here, things would be flying at the moment. Nate has laryngitis.
Well, as long as he's not here, I'll just say he's wrong.
Well, he is wrong. That's a standard.
You're wrong, Nate. Come and tell us something about it, Mr. Laryngitis.
He has completely lost his voice. I talked to him yesterday, and he answered the one. I'm like, are you okay, dude? Anyway.
How convenient, Nate. How convenient indeed.
Anyway, and that is a good point. I do think it's possible that they protected brand for years. I think that does lead into another question, and something that I've been wanting to discuss for a while. Is it possible that people are brought into situations that could be seen as decadent or whatever, and this lifestyle that they are brought into, they go to the parties, they get to do all this and that, later on they can be brought to heel because of things that they did? Now, I don't think it's a stretch. There are very famous Hollywood parties and very famous players in Hollywood who do many, many bad things. I haven't ever attended it myself. I've definitely read about them. But Chandler, you're our Hollywood correspondent, so to speak.
Tell us about the parties you've been to.
The parties you've been to, Chandler.
I didn't say that.
Yeah.
But what do you think about the theory that deviant lifestyles are tolerated but recorded for future purposes of keeping people in line?
I think that that's entirely possible. My understanding is that there were a lot of, when he worked for Channel 4, there were a lot of people who have talked about supposedly how the work environment was built around tolerance of his, wild behavior. And I do think that when you're in an environment where there's decadence, people want to get something from you. And maybe they don't get something from you immediately, or maybe you sever a relationship with that person, but you have dirt on them and you use it when you want to. I mean, that definitely is a possibility.
Well, there may or may not be a particular Hollywood-based religion that makes a practice of getting people to talk about all of their things in a recorded fashion that may or probably may not be used against them.
Nothing that rhymes with Scientology, right?
Nothing that rhymes with that at all.
I've never heard of it before. I don't know what that is.
That would be wrong, because clearly,
I don't know what that is.
Clearly that never happens. But yeah.
I don't know what it is about Hollywood in particular. I maybe it's just the whole be a star, type of dream, I guess, that people have there. But it's such an extraordinarily transactional place, and that's what to me makes it seem like that type of explanation seems very logical to me. I mean, one of the real common things that I'm seeing with this Russell Brand case now is just the similarities with Harvey Weinstein. Now that we've gotten into this issue of everybody knew, that's kind of the turn that the story is taking now. And so when it comes to the question of timing and why are we bringing this out, I wouldn't want to look past the possibility of some of these other considerations. That one, the Me Too movement took a massive hit with the Johnny Depp trial. So if we're going to try to get back on this train of, we just need to believe women without question, then we need something that's a little bit more like Harvey Weinstein, and a little less Amber Heard. Another piece of that too is just the defensive side of it. While this is still going on, people have maybe a little bit of an incentive to get out ahead of it, because if it's going to come out anyway, if somebody is going to get Me Too'd, would you rather be, disclosing it and kind of setting that fire with the allegation so that you can kind of brush your own complicity under the rug? That's a factor to consider as well.
Because it's a culture. It's a culture that enables that kind of behavior. You have somebody who, the reason that a person like, Harvey Weinstein was enabled for so long, was because, first of all, there were people who consented to engaging with him in that way and they got something out of it. Second of all, there was a culture that allowed him to get away with it, and there were a lot of people who buried the bodies, hid the secrets for him. And so all of those people are complicit. Yeah,
and made a
money.
lot of money off of Russell Brand's antics. Let's be honest. They don't.
Right.
He's not a charity. He didn't go working at these places. And I'm talking about just the public antics that he did, like Saxgate or whatever. This is indisputable. He did, in fact, say on there that he had sex with a granddaughter, blah, blah, blah. All this really did happen. It did cause a lot of problems. But just like Howard Stern, I don't know, I might be aging. No, I am aging myself. There was a time that they would just pay his fines every year. Mm-hmm. He was so over the top that he was fined by the FCC every year. He had a fine fund, and I think it was like up to millions of dollars that they would just pop and pay the fine. Why? Because they made 5 times that, 10 times that. Yeah. It was just an investment to them and completely irrelevant. The
cost of doing business.
Exactly.
Which I sort of appreciate actually on that aspect, to be honest. You know, if you're actually making more money than the fine, then, you know, and the fine's the only penalty, then, you know, hell, what the hell? So I don't actually mind that part.
Yeah, I mean, definitely valid point. Anything else on Russell? Because I mean, this could spiral in. I think a lot of the conversations about the situation they immediately spiral, it seems, into he's a bad guy, he did it, and they don't go into the things that I think all of us should be concerned about. Like, I feel everyone here on this panel should be concerned about the government writing a letter to any and all platforms telling them to demonetize or get rid of an individual. This should be universal. And let's say it's 100% guilty. I'm still against this. This can affect all of us, and I think everyone should be chilled. And Joe, you've been very quiet. Where's your rant?
I think we all tend to fall back into what our natural fallback position is, and that's not always an accurate assessment of what is actually happening. So, for example, you know, the speculation as to what the timing now. Okay. Yeah. My first thought is, you know what? We're coming up to the 2024 election. He's very influential. He's very anti-government. That's very favorable to Trump. That's a reason for them to want to take him out. His voice is very loud. That's the first thought I had also, because that's the natural thing that I tend to see. And then I asked myself afterwards, like, it really could be as simple as something totally unrelated to some sort of planned, orchestrated thing, but the timing could be something as simple as 3 different organizations fighting about who's going to be the first one to publish it versus, and that could be something based on like who did the work versus who has more money versus who has more reach. It really could be something as simple as that, which is why it came out now versus coming out, let's say, a year ago. But we naturally will all assume, based on where we're coming from, that the timing is indicative of something without actually knowing that. That's just our bent. The same way when yesterday on Twitter Spaces, I spent 2.5 hours arguing with Viva and I were arguing with 3 Me Too people, and they were naturally assuming. So they're coming from their angle, which is that any woman who ever raises an allegation. I mean, one of them denied that she claims this, but the tone of all 3 of them was anytime a woman raises an allegation, it must be true. And the statistics say that, and we have all the evidence here, and all the evidence that we see here. I don't know if you talked about how that text message looked so doctored that it was, it looked
because
it looked like it looked so poorly doctored. I was like, I think I could do that, and okay, because he was. So when the article said, okay, so if the article said that they brought this out because he's growing on social media, that does not give the article more legitimacy, Nate. If anything, it gives it less legitimacy, and because we don't even have very much in the way of direct quotes. You have reporters who spoke to these people and won't tell us. You know, I think they, aside from the text message, which is purportedly a direct quote, which looks like it's been doctored. And what I'm saying is, and at the same time, I think that when I say that we are all naturally inclined to come at something from the direction that we're used to coming at something, I worry. I also worry at the same time that because he's a voice now for anti-establishment, that I'm going to be more inclined to assume that everything said about him is a lie and be too dismissive when it seems pretty irrational to assume that just because someone agrees with me, that means it's impossible for him to be, someone who regularly engages in sexual assault. So I worry
Better
about
terminology on YouTube, Joe.
What?
Better terminology on YouTube.
Well, right.
Careful
No. So consensual.
Anyway, I get what you're. But
what I'm saying is, I think that's kind of a ridiculous thing to say, especially when 12 years ago, if he was more left leaning, I would be more inclined to believe it's true because the media is talking about him. That doesn't change what happened 20 years ago, what his political positions are today. So it's kind of, we're sort of all trapped in our way of thinking, and I think it's sort of healthy. Yes, do I think this is terrible that we're just trusting, that so many people are trusting the media, and that does this look like a hit job to me? Of course it does. How does it not look like a hit job, especially when they say we're talking about this because he's so powerful? Yeah, that looks like a hit job. At the same time, I do worry that one day I'm going to end up taking up a position for somebody who, in actuality, really did some terrible things because he's someone who's sitting on the right. So that's why I think we all have to sort of take a step back and say, we really don't know anything. And if you start with that assumption and that recognition of just how little we know about what happened, and also start with a position of understanding that context matters in more than anything here, the context of the time frame, that how did people really act 20 years ago? What was more acceptable behavior 20 years ago than it is today? There's a lot of things that people would do, say, words they would say 20 years ago that nobody wants to be caught dead saying today. There's a lot of activities, especially between, especially when they are of that type of nature, which were much more tolerable 20 years ago than they are today. People would be shocked by the basic conversations that we thought were completely innocent, certainly 30 years ago, but even 20 years ago, or even some of the activities like Russell Brand. Yeah, that was considered like a shocking thing to do. Let's say that he turns around and whips himself out. Is that something I ever would have done? No, I grew up in a completely different culture. But in his culture, I think that's something that's seen as a type of thing that's shock funny in a Howard Stern of the 90s type of, or 80s type of shock funny, rather than harassment. But that's how it's being twisted today. That's how, given our 2023 context. I'll let you break it.
Okay. One thing that I saw that just happened to you even right now, and my whole issue with that, whatever it was, Spaces last night, is the whole subject got hijacked into believe all women and all of that, when the subject line of the space was demonetization of somebody.
Yeah.
And we just did. You just did it right now, by the way. And we can't help ourselves. But really, let's think about it for a second. The question is demonetization of Russell Brand, but it went into the belief that okay, he's guilty. Let's just throw it out there and hypothetically say he's 100% guilty. Should he have been demonetized? No. In my opinion, no. He hasn't been convicted. He is not he's not a convicted criminal. There is not been a due process.
Or not that he's guilty, but that if every word in there is
factual or true or whatever.
Is factual, yeah.
So I have something. Okay, so this is something I want to contribute that really matters. The whole point is that it was because he was getting bigger and growing his platform, not that he was using his platform for harm. If he was using his platform for harm and he was using it to commit crimes or get away with problematic behavior or prey upon people, if he was breaking a policy, breaking a rule, being duplicitous with his platform, that would be a problem. The fact that it's just because he was increasing his audience and somebody wanted to stop that, I find incredibly problematic, because what he was talking about, what he was doing with his platform seems like it was perfectly reasonable, logical. He was using it in a way that, seemed to conform to the standards and guidelines of YouTube, etc. So I don't think that you should be deplatformed just because somebody has decided now that you are a bad person and nobody should listen to you. That I know that YouTube is a private company, but it does infringe upon free speech. And if he wasn't misusing the platform,
YouTube is a private company. YouTube is a private company.
I know, David. That's what I just said.
But look, David, where I want to push back on you, David, a little bit on that, and that is, if you're gonna say that, fine, be consistent. That's all YouTube has to do. They are demonetizing him for alleged, and very little of what he was accused of in that article is actually a crime. A lot of it's just being an asshole and being a dick. Fine. He's a scummy human being. I'll accept that. Very little of it was actually a punishable crime. But so they demonetized him for allegations made by 4 anonymous people. So at least secondhand. In some cases, the stories were third-hand in the newspaper. YouTube actively platforms and promotes Sammy the Bull Gravano that has admitted to killing 19 people in cold blood as a mafia member.
Which I'm okay with.
Come on, YouTube.
I'm okay with
point there.
Yeah.
And Cardi B, who has admitted to robbing and drugging.
And I'm not saying deplatform Sammy the Bull. I'm going, if you're going to let a guy who's confessed to 19 murders and worked for the mob.
John Hinckley's on there.
And I mean, think that's another thing also, which is kind of a weird thing about life in this decade, which is that there is, when someone is accused of these crimes, they are considered to be far worse than actually killing the person. And that's what I opened yesterday on Spaces. I was like, if he was accused of murdering these women, he would not be deplatformed. It's because instead of murdering them, what?
Anybody can be accused. Anybody can be accused.
Right. What I'm saying is, but assuming YouTube's position is, based on what we see so far, he deserves to be demonetized. But if instead of it being of a nature that he flashed his willy at someone, but it was of a nature that he actually killed these people, and those intimations, nobody would have been screaming to demonetize him. I mean, think about what I think the victims probably prefer to be victims of the assault than they are of murder. But that's the nature and the level of how things have been so twisted. I understand. Look, that's a terrible crime, a terrible thing to do to any human, to violate them. I understand that, but it's the level it's been taken to in the desperate effort to protect these people, women or men. And it's really, and let's face it, the objective is to protect women. It's not to protect men. You never, ever, ever hear stories of someone being deplatformed. When the story broke, let's say, for example, about that guy Dan Wooten, no one was so concerned about whatever men were victims of Dan Wooten. There was no it was all about Dan Wooten being a terrible person, but it just isn't the same type of concern for a man who's a victim as a woman. So it really is about protecting women, and that's fine. Look, I'm old school. I think we're supposed to protect the society is supposed to protect women.
I don't think it's fine at all.
Well, okay, we
can I
I don't agree.
You made me think of something, Joe, and I've been wanting to put it out there for a while. And somebody clear me up on the law here. Mm-hmm. But from what I understand, taking off a condom and not using it at some point became the R word. And the question,
some jurisdictions, yes.
Okay, my question is this: lying about being on birth control, or lying about the reverse, or the female being the reverse, is that also the R word?
No.
It's, I heard Robert.
I can explain why technically if you care.
I heard Robert Barnes make that comparison. I don't think that's a fair comparison, though. And the reason I don't think it's a fair comparison is because there's an assault. There's physically an assault that's happening when a man removes a prophylactic.
I disagree.
That now he's injecting a fluid that she does not expect to have injected into her.
Okay, what if she pops a hole in it? Okay, and we could go like for like all the way down the line. She popped a hole in the actual device. Now what, Joe?
Okay, no. So okay, fine. Look, that's definitely a far more apt analogy.
That's question. I don't know.
That's a far more apt analogy, definitely. My point is, I don't think that's really such a great analogy, because there is and it's not. You are correct though that's if someone would to it's called stealthing when they do that, when they take off the condom and they deceive the recipient.
By the way, it's disgusting. It's horrible. But I'm just saying,
terrible
it goes both ways.
But you're right that it's not rape. In fact, I looked up the California statute. It's not a crime. It's a civil penalty, even in California, which is.
It's going to depend on the circumstances, because I did some research into this as well. And really what it comes down to is just a question of withdrawing consent, whether with consent is withdrawn at that point in time. And that comes down to a question of knowledge, right? If it's actually true stealthing and you don't know, so you can't withdraw consent, then, you probably haven't committed a crime. But if you are aware of it's happening, you're not cool with it, you express you're not cool with it, it happens anyway, now you're in a forcible rape situation in California. So it's one of these things where there's so much gray area and the standards just seem very inconsistent and,
again,
bizarre.
that's even saying that it's something that's so terrible. I don't assume that 20 years ago that was something that was, even though it was, I don't think that the society looked at it the same 20 years ago as they do now.
Like DUI, same thing. Many years ago, people drove drunk all the time.
I was going to point out the distinction technically is the distinction between fraud in the inducement and fraud in fact, as to why one is rape and one is not. It's the difference between tricking someone into doing something and lying to them about what you're doing. So fraud in the inducement is not considered rape, but fraud in fact is. So the classic distinction, like you lie to a woman about, that you're wealthy, you lie to a woman about who you are, you lie to a woman about, all the reasons you entice her into having sex with you. That's considered fraud in the inducement. That is not considered rape. The reason that stealthing.
Stop saying that word. You guys really want
to apologize. Great. I apologize. I'm sorry.
It was just sorry. Yes, I apologize.
We're police. I was using technically correct language, and YouTube doesn't like that. I'm so sorry. My mistake. Anyways, the reason that stealthing is considered rape is because you're lying about what it is in fact. You're not lying about inducing, you're lying about what it is. And so that's the reason that a woman lying to you about being birth control is not considered rape, but stealthing is, because it's the difference between fraud in the inducement and fraud in fact. Now we can move back to our prior discussion now that I've explained it.
Yeah, but that's an interesting legal distinction you're making there.
Andrea.
But isn't it fraud in the inducement in that you're telling her you're going to do something that you probably have no intention of doing?
Well, but you didn't actually do it. That's the thing. It's like you're lying about what it is. Like you lied to say, "Oh, I'm going to use the condom." Am I still allowed to use that word on YouTube? I don't know.
I hope so.
About it, and in fact, not doing it.
Well, so specifically, the allegation was that he started the sexual act with the condom and took it off in the middle of the act. So what is that then?
So if this is all dependent on their exchange in advance, it depends on what they agreed to and the nature of the consent. So like it depends. Like if we have no particular agreement, let me say to you this: if we have no particular agreement, and I start using a condom and then I stop using a condom, there's no fraud because I didn't lie, right? I didn't say I was going to do something, I didn't do something. There's no lie, so there's no fraud. It's only a problem if I make a representation or you make a demand. So it's like, I'm going to use a condom the whole time, or you say to me, you must use a condom the whole time. Then it becomes fraud because now the consent is void because I'm going beyond our agreement in response to the agreement, or because your demand, the consent is void. So that's the problem.
And that's why this text messaging, granted, there's lots of problems with it, but let's just assume, for the sake of argument, let's assume that this text messaging is legitimate. That's why it's potentially problematic, because it suggests they had a pre-existing understanding that her consent was conditioned on him using a condom. So if he does not use the condom, that's not consistent with the terms that they agreed to.
I'll tell you this.
I don't know image of this text, because I've been looking for it and I have like 4 different versions of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's the question about the doctrine of it for sure.
I have a problem with labeling.
Wait, can I ask a question really quick?
Please go ahead. Chandler, go ahead.
I just had a question for Andrea, because I saw that you posted the specific statute, and I took a look at that. And so it's my understanding, based on your tweets, you said that the statute of allegation, or the statute of limitations would be up for the crime in California. So my question is this: if there are allegations that are filed in other, let's say that there are charges that are filed in the UK for multiple other women, would that nullify the statute of limitations, or would it not? Does it have to be jurisdictional?
I don't know if it has to be jurisdictional or not. That's a good question. What you're getting at is there's a 10-year statute or historically there was a 10-year statute of limitations for grape charges in California. And that got revised in like 2017, where they basically eliminated it. But you have an ex post facto problem, meaning you can't criminalize conduct after it's already taken place. So things that had occurred before 2017, very, generally speaking, can't be included in that change in the law. But there's always been aggravating factors that the state could allege in order to basically expand the statute of limitations. And so multiple victims is one of those circumstances. I believe, I'm not positive, but I think that might be the justification for the Danny Masterson case, why they were able to proceed with that prosecution, despite it being like 20 some years old or something like that. So I don't know if they would have to show multiple accusers like in the same case, in the same jurisdiction.
Well, there's two things. The UK has no statute of limitations, so that's irrelevant. They can be charged today, tomorrow, whatever.
Yes.
And then, yes, you're right about them changing the law. They did it in New York with Trump, and Steve Perry.
Yeah, I'm talking specifically about California, to be clear.
I'm confused as to why that would be, that just because
I'm interested in what happened here in LA.
In England. Why would that? I don't know.
Why wouldn't you run into jurisdictional issues for that? I can't be. They can't try me in England for something I did in California.
They can't try you for it, but it can absolutely be considered. And I'll give you an example. In criminal sentencing, I live in a scoring jurisdiction, right? Where we have these like complex grids and formulas and stuff where you look at the person's prior convictions and then you look at the seriousness of the offense and you kind of calculate these things to get what the range is going to be. And so we constantly deal with the question of out of jurisdiction convictions because they can get included in your offender score. They can count. They can have legal significance in my jurisdiction, even though they didn't happen here.
International
full faith and credit also doesn't hurt when it comes to that, right? The convictions of one state, full faith and credit being taken by another state.
It's not an issue of full faith and credit. It's so for example, in my state, the question is whether it's comparable because we're looking at whether things would potentially count as a crime in the state of Washington. And you can't necessarily determine that just based on the fact of a conviction in a different state with different laws. So, something that you did that's a felony offense in Montana, may not be a crime in Washington at all. It may only be a misdemeanor. So it all gets very complicated when you get down into those details.
Nate just brought something up that I did not realize. He's saying they can expand it if the perp was not known and DNA ID'd later. Trump was for civil only. So that kind of makes more sense.
It's Stroger versus California, right? With the ex post facto thing.
But I don't think you can change the conduct that's subject to the criminal law. I mean, you might have a tolling of a statute of limitations based on not knowing who it is or whatever. But what Andrea was saying, I think on criminal cases, you can't criminalize something now and have it go back.
You can't retroactively expand ex post facto. That's Stroger versus California from the early 2000s, I think.
So refocusing this back into a selfish way, I have a question. Okay. Can we expect, or maybe this is for Kurt, can we hope that this leads to a lawsuit by Russell against YouTube for something that Legal Vices has an issue with? How about consistent application of your rules? What would be the likelihood? Because that would benefit all of us on YouTube.
Who's the contract lawyer? Because it isn't a contractual question.
It's a contract question.
It's and you have to read the contract. Who's even seen? I haven't read all their stuff. That's for sure.
I read it every Saturday morning. I don't know.
I read the bar. I read little box that says "click here to continue." That's the only thing I read.
But that's what I'm wondering.
Are we talking about contract law vis-a-vis grape again? Is that where we went?
Just wondering if anyone's anticipating a lawsuit against YouTube by Russell. No. See, I feel like I want to spend. I want the wealthy to spend their money helping me and my channel.
I had the same thought. I was like, oh God, please make it a class action suit.
Exactly. Set some sort of precedent so that YouTube has some sort of standards that they have to apply uniformly.
Yeah, that would be nice. Okay, so
the closest thing you have is a duty of good faith and fair dealing, but that's not really something that has a lot of teeth.
Yeah.
All right, I respond
always
to
some
money.
California business code that applies. There's always a California business code that applies.
To jump to another case, I don't know anything about this case. Somebody's saying, why is nobody streaming the Maya versus Hopkins trial? Very complicated and sad. I don't even know what it is. Is anybody familiar with it who can talk about it?
I think it was a Munchausen by proxy thing, right? But I have not seen it.
Oh, you actually know the topic, so you're like 3 steps
Megan
ahead
Fox has
of
been
I think the
streaming it,
rest
but I
of
actually
us.
haven't watched it.
Oh, Megan Fox is.
Well, Steve only seemed about 75%
I know that there was a documentary.
sure.
It was. Let's see. Does Steve
So-
know more? Steve, go ahead. By all means.
No, what's
No,
it about,
that-
Steve?
I told all I knew about it when I said I think it's about Munchausen by proxy. I think that's what this case is.
Okay, so my understanding is the lawsuit. I actually don't know specifically if they're suing the hospital. There was a documentary that was made about a young girl who had a health condition. She went to the hospital for treatment. It was a very serious condition that really affected her life, her parents' lives. The hospital concluded that the parents were abusing her, and apparently there was some issue either with custody or something like that. That is my understanding, and so I believe they're either suing the hospital or something like that. Really not sure exactly all of what it's about, but there's a documentary on Netflix about it.
I feel like somebody was streaming this because I was watching part of it, and I'm not sure who. It wasn't on
Somebody said
LNC
Megan
where-
Fox.
Megan Fox was.
Was she? Okay.
Yeah, Megan Fox is streaming it. She was streaming it last night. And I know the parents are a party to the lawsuit. The daughter might be as well.
Okay, how about here's
Sorry, I
a
don't know
good
more.
one. Okay, since we don't know, I'm going to go to Kurt. I think he's been covering this. And Tucker just did an interview with the person involved yesterday, Ken Paxton.
I watched the impeachment trial. It was interesting and illuminating.
Tell us more.
Well, okay. Generally speaking, the allegation was that Ken Paxton had essentially turned his office to the private benefit of this guy named Nate Paul, who is a real estate developer in the Austin area, that he had lots of real estate deals that were going south. And for whatever reason, the motive is a little bit unclear. Nate Paul had been a campaign donor, but there's no other particular motive beyond that, that the attorney general essentially turned over his offices to the private benefit of Nate Paul when there was no interest for Texas, and also retaliated against people who blew the whistle by telling the FBI about their suspicions that things were problematic. And interestingly, I think the most votes they got was they won more than majority for it. So they didn't really even come close to, they needed 21 and they got 16, I think at best. I think on the retaliation charge, which I also thought was the strongest charge. A lot of them were particularly weak. There were allegations that he had gotten benefits from Nate Paul in the form of renovations to his house, but the record was vague on that. That Nate Paul had hired or caused to be hired his mistress, but the record was vague on that. As for bribery charge, and that's basically he was acquitted and he's back at his office. So what else do you want to know?
Well, okay. I saw the interview with Tucker. I kind of was half listening while trying to do prep because I'm supposed to talk about later, Freeform Friday. He was making claims that as soon as the impeachment went down, he was removed from office, so
That's
he could
correct.
no longer do his job.
That's
and
correct.
completely frozen out. And he also had a gag order to where he was not allowed to speak about it all in public. Meanwhile, there was a continuous drip to all the newspapers in the area going against him the whole time. And if this is all true, I find that to be particularly chilling when you can have somebody, charged like that. This is a similar thing with the Russell Brand, right? You literally have somebody who's accused of something and all the press in the area are against him. His politics don't line up very well with the Dallas Morning News, apparently, and other papers. I'm sure Austin, he's a very popular guy. I didn't know if anybody had looked into that or seen anything about it. It seems like a good Joe topic. Joe.
Well, just as a minor
Thank
note
you.
before we move on, he is correct. Under Texas law, the moment that you're impeached, you are suspended from office. So that is a difference between the federal law under Texas. So Ken Paxton was not the attorney general for the last 3 months. So we can move
But
on.
that could have significant results if he's working on, cases that are deemed important in different areas. Like
He actually said he's looking into going after
Google.
all sorts of also big pharma and the state because of issues related to big pharma from 2020, 2021, and fraud with respect to promises that were made about various new medicines that have been commonly taken by a lot of people over the last several years, and that they basically flat out lied about, their testing and what they had done. Now we know that the government has taken a lot of steps to insulate big pharma from certain new medications that a lot of people have taken over the last several years.
Popular. We'll just say popular, right?
Popular.
Voluntarily or not.
Right. So, and that he was actually, close to commencing an action there, which and as pointed out in the Tucker interview, he probably has been the biggest thorn in the side of the Biden administration. And he felt that the Biden White House and the Justice Department was behind this impeachment in the first place. There were several attorneys.
Karl Rove.
And Karl Rove and the DOJ. Karl Rove is basically, is like basically working, still for the Bush family, according to him. And yeah, that he's the strongest voice against really the uniparty is really what his point is, and that's why that he was attacked here. That there was no forewarning. They ignored standard Texan protocols as to how to go forward with this impeachment, and he just wakes up one day and finds out that he's been impeached without there being any trial, any hearing, any evidence, any witnesses. It's just boom, you're impeached, get out of your office, and you're gagged from talking about it. So that sounds like it's kind of a terrible thing.
Isn't it? I mean, it's kind of creepy. It seems like if you can pull off enough support to impeach somebody, you can delay them or stall them or shut them down. That doesn't seem American. Again, obviously it is.
It's in the Texas Constitution. What do you want? God bless Texas.
Well, okay. How many of you support that? How many of you support say, okay, immediately upon the impeachment, they're removed from the office, doors closed. I mean, he literally
imagine if that's how it worked with the president of the United States.
No, that's right.
Shit.
I can see where you would want it on paper, where it sounds good on paper, but in practice, I see where the abuse could come in. So,
well, and I see how it might have been a good idea, when there was a little bit more of a bipartisan spirit in government than there is now.
The lieutenant governor suggested we should have a constitutional amendment to change that, so he's certainly not a fan. Mm-hmm. I think it's worth noting also it's the first impeachment in Texas in 100 years. We've only done like 3 of these things in our history, so it's not exactly an impeachment heavy state. So it's not something that comes up a lot.
Good. But
but I would say, due process rights and all that stuff. I mean, again, it sounds good on paper.
Yeah.
It sounds good on paper, but that's it.
I don't even think it sounds good on paper, because I just think, well, wait, if the person is that much of a threat, then they should be practicing their office from a cell. They would be locked up. Like let's say they did some extreme crime, one of those murders, murders or grapes or things like that, then they'd probably be in a cell somewhere. But this is a corruption thing, I'm guessing. What was the charge? It was kind of a corruption charge, right, Kurt?
Yeah, okay. I could go through it in a little bit of specificity. There was a charge that he improperly interfered with the Mitty Foundation, which is a charity run by the actor who played Walt Jr. in Breaking Bad. He has a charity, and the Mitty Foundation invested in real estate dealings in order to obtain money for its charitable purposes. They claimed fraud. There was a lawsuit. They claimed that the Attorney General's office improperly interfered in this private lawsuit by putting pressure on the Mitty Foundation to settle, which would have cost the Mitty Foundation millions of dollars, and there was no interest for Texas. There was an allegation that the Attorney General generated an opinion letter to try to stop foreclosures from happening in order to benefit Paul, who was having problems with his real estate holdings. There was an allegation as to that Paul helped to pay for renovations at Paxton's home, that he caused to have Paxton's mistress to be hired in order to benefit Paxton. There was a allegation that they did a no opinion letter with respect to a public disclosure issue that Nate Paul wanted to get information over. There was an allegation that Paxton hired this guy named Brian Kamek as a private attorney to file actions, including grand jury subpoenas. The names for which to be subpoenaed were provided by Nate Paul's lawyer directly to the guy at the Attorney General's office, who were all like basically personal enemies of Nate Paul. So abuse of criminal process in order to get basically what amounts to private discovery for personal lawsuits, which is a real problem. And the retaliation, which is the strongest claim. The 8 people went to the FBI to report on it. They told the Attorney General they went to the FBI. And in some cases, the very next day, actions were taken against them by, for example, suspending them from office while internal investigations were ongoing. Ultimately, some of them were fired for very nebulous reasons, at least in my view. I thought the case for the retaliation was by far and away the best claim for the whistleblower retaliation. But, you know, the thing, of course, to note is that it's political in its nature, as I keep pointing out to everyone. This is not judicial. This is political. It's literally the House and Senate. So the rules are made up and the points don't matter. So I did my best legal analysis, and at the end, you're like, well, it's political. So
what about the was it the speaker? Well, I did love that clip. He did appear drunk to me. I don't know if anybody has seen that clip, but he either was drunk, having possibly a medical issue. I never want to say anything there, but
I thought he had cerebral palsy when I saw that clip. I'm not even kidding. Like I that's how drunk he looked. I literally thought he had cerebral palsy.
I did too.
I was gonna start mocking him, and then I was like, wait, I think he has CP. That's totally not cool to make fun of someone who actually has CP. And then afterwards, you heard him explaining that you heard Ken Paxton explaining that that's how drunk he was.
yeah.
And by the way, for whatever it's worth, it's interesting because I was just noting in chat, like, you're not a whistleblower if you don't have evidence. I'm not sure that's necessarily true. And to sort of prove the point, I was on my channel covering a case today where there were people at the IRS making whistleblower reports about how they had pressure put on them to not interview Hunter Biden. You know, their superiors told them to, you know, slow roll things, and they're like, oh, something seems wrong. And they made whistleblower reports. They didn't have any external evidence. They didn't have any proof of any bribes or external things. They're just like, my boss is acting weird. This isn't something they should be doing. We have what seems to be enough evidence to go forward, and I'm being told not to investigate. I'm being told not to take steps I would normally take. So they didn't have any evidence other than their own observations, and they made whistleblower reports. So if those are whistleblowers, then Paxton's people are whistleblowers. So it's like, you got to treat it both ways. You got to be even about it.
Well, that also assumes that someone's observations or their words is not evidence. That is evidence.
Yeah, absolutely, it's evidence. It's like, you know, things seem odd. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. My boss shouldn't be making these decisions. He's causing me to do things I wouldn't normally do. Something's wrong.
Also, there's standard operating procedures and policies that they could point to and say, we do this way all the time, and they're saying do this the other. So that's evidence. I agree. I do want to get some Rumble rants that came in. Some are a little bit older. Rivka, the Jade Gamer, says, how is a woman saying I'm on hormonal birth control different fraud from a man saying I'm using a condom? And would it be different if it was a lie about having a vasectomy?
Inducement versus fact. You're lying. You're lying about the reasons that you're doing versus lying about what it is. That's the reason.
To me, the difference is really whether there's a legal battery that's going on there. It's an offensive touching that's happening in the form of this is when a doctor commits surgery. This is consent because you understand what he's doing. If he takes the wrong leg, that's considered a battery. If you inject a fluid into someone, or if you're, you know, in theory, there's technically a legal battery. I think it's terrible that it gets the same label as some woman walking in a parking lot who's attacked by you know, a total stranger and assaulted in the worst form of violation she could possibly imagine. I think to compare those two is a terrible injustice to the victims in the latter scenario. But
I think
yeah, go ahead.
That analogy actually it's very intriguing to me because, of course, in the medical arena, you have the issue of informed consent, right? It's not just that you consented to it, you received full disclosure about the risks and the nature of the procedure and so on and so forth. So you were fully informed before you undertook that decision. There's no similar requirement like that in the context of grape charges. It's just basically assumed that if you are competent to be able to make decisions for yourself, then you can decide whether you want to assume those risks or not. So I think that's an interesting comparison, just because it does show like these are not as similar as maybe you think that they might be.
Right. No, I was like thinking like, you know, if a doctor takes out the wrong kidney kind of thing. Right. So,
Yeah.
so in that case, that's considered.
That's an error, not an assault.
What?
Yeah, that's an error, not an assault.
You're right.
True.
That's a fair distinction, Eric, because over there, that's more of a mistake than an intentional, an intentional type of scenario. So I appreciate your correction there. That's
Well,
a fair
there's a
correction.
fiduciary duty between a doctor and a patient. There's not a fiduciary duty between two consenting sexual partners.
Great point.
Unless
That does make a
something results from this encounter.
Well, then even still, you don't have a fiduciary duty to your
Yeah.
partner. You have
Yeah.
fiduciary duty to the child that results. So still,
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's a legitimate question, and I do like the vasectomy versus the hormonal birth control. That is kind of a fraud, in my opinion. However,
I think
look at-
vasectomy is a fairer. Someone lying about having a vasectomy is a fairer analysis to a woman claiming she's on birth control than the condom situation. That's just my take on it.
well, either way, destroying. Like I said, I think that you could draw an equal parallel. And then the other problem I have with you, Joe, is that you're talking about the injection principle. Unfortunately, the way that we are wired as human beings, there's only one way the injection in general happens in this scenario.
But that doesn't change
Well,
the fact that from a technical perspective, there's an actual battery that's happening. I'll tell you something else. Even if she thinks, forgetting about the actual fluid for a moment, but even if she thinks that she's not.
where the hell is this discussion gone? That's all I'm wondering right now.
I'm simply saying, even if she thinks she's not touching his skin, and she is touching his skin, that's technically an unapproved. That's something that she didn't consent to. That type of that technically could be deemed a battery as well. In other words, if I think I might say, if two people in a fight might say, I'm okay with you hitting with a glove, but not a bare fist. So if someone uses a bare fist, that could remove the consent, right? I mean, does that make? I mean, it's a different. My point is that when a man uses the whole point about a man using a condom is it's changing the nature of the physical contact that's happening there, which is not the case with a woman who lies about her birth control. That's why I think the vasectomy in that comparison is far more akin to a woman doing that. And that's much more fraud than the inducement thing. I think that helps highlight what Kurt was saying as far as the difference between fraud and inducement and fraud in fact, and that the vasectomy is more of a fraud inducement type of thing, right?
Yeah, that'd be right.
So,
All right.
Yeah, that'd be right.
Let me see. Making a fluid
I
deposit.
can't believe I'm giving a bio class here. Like,
misrepresent place is different.
These days, you got to give a bio class. Hey, what's a woman still, right? That's right.
All right, so I've got 3 more Rumble rants, and this is probably safer territory. They're all from Lord of Theory, and they're all related to Paxton, I believe. First one was, I was watching the impeachment on a local CBS affiliate as well as RSBN on Rumble. After the failed impeachment, the guy in charge of the proceedings was going off on how procedures weren't followed. Continues, CBS cut the feed while RSBN, Right Side Broadcasting Network, on Rumble played the whole thing. Also, Biden affiliates inserted themselves into the proceedings. And third, I'm sure it has nothing to do with Ken Paxton filing lawsuits after the 2020 election.
Oh, yeah. Well, the bar is after him for that. I think he's still in investigation trying to take away his bar license. And he's also facing securities frauds cases, which he's been under indictment for since 2015. He's a magician. It's been 8 years and still hasn't managed to go to trial. I don't know how you pull that off, but that's where we're at.
Okay, I'm going to go with one more story. Somebody asked me to cover it or us to cover it. It's definitely not as gross and dire as everything else, but I think it's something that could actually affect us all. And I'd love to get everybody's input. This is a few weeks old, but there was a situation where these people removed all the contents of an apartment for somebody who was supposedly being evicted. They threw it all out in the dumpster, and it turns out they had the wrong apartment.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's an oopsies.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but here's where it gets really weird. It seems very obvious on its face that you can't take the stuff and throw it away. Supposedly they brought, whatever they could pull out of the dumpster back, like, oh, here you go. But there's other things that are damaged, can't be replaced, things of that sort. Then the apartment said, well, you know what? You're not actually supposed to be here. You're subletting the apartment you are in. So we don't have to pay you anything. Now, I have a question for you, and this is my dumb, non-legal mentality. If I leave some items in somebody's apartment, or I stay over in their apartment, and I go out for the day, and my contents get thrown away in a dumpster and destroyed, can they say, hey, you're not the tenant, tough shit, because you're not the tenant? Because that, to me, is kind of the argument that they're making here, when they were wrong about pulling the stuff to begin with. So,
it makes sense.
It suggests to me that what's happening is that they sued under some type of like wrongful eviction type of theory, but conversion is conversion. You don't have to be a lawful tenant to have your property converted.
I was going to say the only thing that would make sense is if the tenant was being evicted and he's the subtenant and they served process and did everything correctly, then maybe he doesn't have a recourse. But conversion is still conversion. That assumes that they evicted the right unit, just the wrong person. But it sounds like they evicted the wrong unit.
Yes.
So so I don't see where that.
And you can't magically luck yourself into compliance. That's just generally a legal principle. It's like you can't get lucky. Things based on what you know and don't know. So you evicted the wrong apartment. The fact that it turned out to be an unlawful subtenant, you can't just magically be like, oh, okay. Well, I knew that all along. That's not how that works.
Well, let's assume that somebody takes their unit, wraps it up in plastic, and stores it in a cave of some sort, but takes the plastic off at some other point.
And tells them that it's still covered in plastic.
The entire unit we're taking with us?
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean,
I the joke. I'm sorry, I was a half step too slow.
We also have to remember the fact that the only reason a landlord has a right to do something with his tenant's property is because the tenant normally has contractually ceded that right, or he has some sort of financial claim against him. Meaning, like you just if you just have some sort of verbal agreement with a tenant and let him come in there, and then he overstays his welcome or something like that. That doesn't give you the right to automatically just repossess his stuff or to throw it in the trash. You need to have that expressly written into the agreement. So if there's no contractual relationship between this third party and this landlord, you have to ask yourself on what basis they have authority to do anything with his stuff.
Well, and there's all kinds of stories out there of people that allowed house guests to stay just a little too long, and then they want them to go, and the police are like, well, you got to evict them now. Even though you don't have a written lease or anything like that, they're staying there long enough that you need to actually go through the process.
Squatters, right?
You have tenancies by sufferance. We have that in Washington.
Yeah. So this guy's there, rightfully or wrongfully, he's there. They can't just say, oh, well, now you're not entitled to anything. Like Andrea said, conversion's conversion. And there's probably a few landlord-tenant violations that they perpetrated as well. Just maybe a couple.
Good's going to have to pay out, guys.
Yep.
Give the guys money.
I've had clients that have literally removed doors and removed stuff unlawfully. And I'm just like, all right, well, how much do you want to pay to make this right? Because you're going to end up paying.
Wow.
Yeah, that's all sorts of wrong. What state was that in?
Texas.
Texas.
Kurt's backyard. No, I think it was in Dallas that it occurred. But
well, that's Kurt's backyard, right?
Yeah, sure. It's a big backyard.
Kurt will be right over there saying, hey, you need a lawyer? Well, he did pass the bar in Texas, so you could technically, right?
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so you know what? I'm going to close out then with a last story here from Steve, and getting back to the murky.
Oh no, that's a terrible story.
Yeah, why not?
Yes.
Put us on a extremely low point. I don't know anything about the Delphi murders
I do.
other than people have thrown the name around Delphi murders.
Odinism.
Yeah, I don't know what Odinism is. It's pagan.
So what happened, of course, and some things just come out of this case when people blurt them out in hearings or whatever due to the restrictions on disseminating information. But anyway, the defense filed a motion to try and suppress evidence resulting from search warrant of Allen's home and his vehicle. But it was about 130 pages long. It's far more than you would normally see. And in it, they discussed details of the crime scene and their theories of who perpetrated it, not their client, and why their client may have confessed while he was in custody, which is also something that's swirling around out there. And they linked it all together, kind of in, is it real or is it tiny ninjas on steroids? So what they said was the details of the crime scene demonstrate that who killed the two girls, which was horrible, left them in a situation that indicated it was ritual killings. That's blood on the tree painted a certain way, certain things arranged on the girls and stuff like that. And they put this down to this Odin cult, okay, which they also say is white supremacist because that gets you bonus points in social media now, that it was an Odin cult that did it. And that their client is not associated with that cult, which I'm not aware of any reason why he would be. So good theory on their part. But they take it further and they say, well, his confessions, to the degree they occurred in jail, were part of a mental breakdown. And that's one theory. But the other is some of the guards in jail are Odinites and would wear Odin patches in jail and were potentially pressuring him, beating him down, however you want to put that, and videotaping him while he's talking to his attorneys to induce him, coerce him into confessing to the murder. Now, the scene's one thing, but why the Odinites would want him to confess to his wife, which isn't out there in the public, instead of pleading guilty or just writing a letter saying I did it. I mean, if the goal of the Odinites was to get this guy to take the fall, telling your wife on the video is not a very direct way to do it. But there sure is a lot of Odinites in the story. And back in the 80s when I first started on all this, there was a Satanist behind every tree, and you had to learn what to look for to see if it was there. But a main thing in law enforcement was also to look at the scene to find out when it's not there, just because you might think it is, because there's a stick here or a candle or even a pentagram or something.
Well,
so
Steve,
I mean,
on YouTube,
every
you have to
recording was backmasked.
I'm just saying on YouTube you have to say satin. You can't.
Okay, satin.
You can't go there.
So we don't see the pictures of the crime scene, and I think that's for the best. And so I don't know that their characterization of it is correct. But it was interesting that they paint this picture, which would disassociate their client potentially, but then put the guards into it. And do they have evidence these guards wore these patches and actually did something? But I guess it left me wondering, like, how many Odinites are out there, and are they all in on this kind of ritual stuff? I don't know. I found that the story in its totality to be a big one to swallow.
I'm disappointed that this cult slipped by my notice.
Yeah, and why would this be the only sacrifice they've done? They're obviously not paying sufficient respect to Odin if they've only done one.
Well, in terms of the white nationalist angle, everybody I've seen in the case is whiter than I am. And that's not easy to do, or maybe equally so. But so I'm not, that seems like some social media, like catchwords to catch the algorithm. They have legitimate issues with the state's case, and I'm not saying they don't, but I'm saying the totality of the Odin story was like, oh, wow, there's a lot. This is a lot for me to process and swallow. The Odinites control the jail, the crime scene, everything that's going on. It's a lot.
How many Odinites can there possibly be?
And the Odinites were the initial suspect.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't disassociate their client from that, and it may point to some people who did this sort of stuff. I mean, I'm following their logic with that. And if they were Odinites, that's just an excuse to murder these girls. People kill people in the name of. It's not like every Odinite's like Jess is out killing people. That's not what's happening. So it would just be an excuse if it were true. But then the story did go out further to the guards or Odinites and pressuring them. And it's like, you're trying to bat 1,000 with this Odin story. You want to knock everything out with it. So it's a lot. And we don't know the state's response.
Odin sucks. Prayer for life.
So Odinites are confirmed like real. This is a real group of people that exist.
I'm sure they are, because something exists everywhere. Everything exists
patches.
But how many of them are there?
But I just remember in the early 90s, there was a cult everywhere that was killing everybody always. But most of it was just like I don't know, bored housewives making stuff up. It seemed like telling their kids to stay out of there because there's cults.
Well, there was the McMartin
this-
preschool trial, and that
Yeah.
revealed that there was some huge hoax, and there was a lot of, like the way
Right,
they questioned
yeah.
the children. And, it was a lot of like
Oh, yeah.
panic and fear, and they were asking leading questions.
I'm wondering
if
if
I-
this group just really exists, though. That's what I'm wondering.
Oh,
Well, they
there we
might
go.
exist, and somebody might have an awareness of them, but they might do that to throw investigators off the scent of their particular person. Like in the, like with the Manson cult, they tried to make everything seem like it was done by African American people. They tried to, they tried to insinuate that with the way that they set up the crime scene at the Tate LaBianca murders.
And the reason why this matters in this particular case is really not because of whether or not Odinism is real. It's because law enforcement initially suspected that the crime was related to Odinism, and their initial suspect had connections with Odinism, and that initial suspect also had connections with the murdered children. So it's not, it almost doesn't even really matter if Odinism is real or not. The point of this motion is that this was the FBI information that they had, that they were relying on when they did this investigation. And none of this information was put forward when they're seeking a search warrant for, the guy that they ultimately arrest and charge for this crime. So that's why they're asking for this Franks hearing. They're basically saying that the state hasn't given you all of the information, including potentially exculpatory information. Okay, if somebody else did it, that's potentially exculpatory to this guy. So that's really why it matters. It's not whether Odinism is real or not. It's that the FBI thought it was real enough to go down this line and to feature that in their investigation. And so by not disclosing that, they have essentially misled the court.
But they are also the ones saying that, hey, his confession, to the degree it exists, we don't know what he really said, but they're addressing it, so there must be something, was due to these Odin guards. So I agree with Andrea. It's not really important whether it's real or not. It's important what the crime scene was, how that could relate to certain people. I think that's a legitimate issue the defense has got there. What I'm saying is they take that argument and they pump a lot of air into it, and it starts to, like, let's put the whole case inside of Odinism. So that would be tough for me to think, well, here's these Odin associated people, and Odinism may not even be real at the crime scene. And whether the police should have told that to the judge is a legit issue. But the defense are saying basically it is real enough that actually the prison guards are Odinites. And Odinites motivated enough to associate with the people who actually murdered the girls to try and cover it up for them by pressuring Allen to confess. And they said that in their brief. And what I'm saying is that story is starting to get a little out there for me in that one, from the logic of what you're saying, which is the crime scene suggested other people, because I don't see anything with Allen having to do with the way they say the crime scene was done, and other people maybe did. I find that very intriguing, but I think they take that and then they amplify it up to, well, the guards are in on it. The guards are in on it with the killers because of Odinism. So if you don't believe that there's really some Odinism out there, that's maybe a little different than whether you should invalidate the warrant or not. But they're, to me, to the public, saying don't believe this confession stuff because this guy was pressured. But to buy that, you have to think, well, the guards had this patch on in Odin We Trust and the Three Mountains, and that they are helping the killers because they're all in this tight-knit cult that's white supremacist. And I mean, that's what they all said in their brief. So to me, that one is sometimes, maybe they stayed up too late writing that brief and got a little fevered and took it a little further than I can certainly swallow.
See, to me, state agents being state agents is enough of a reason to suggest that the guards pressured him into confessing to something.
Well,
alone. You don't need to go to the
approach.
cult line.
Right.
There's state agents acting in the state agency capacity. That's enough to believe that he was coerced.
Okay. Anyway, by the way, I did look it up. Apparently, it's called heathenry, and nicknamed Odinism or something like that. So anyone who wants to go down the rabbit hole, heathenry is in Wikipedia. People can look it up and find out more information. But on that note, where can everybody find you, Dave?
MLS Network right here. MLS, just a little bit of rebranding. But yeah, so I'm still covering the Whitmer trial. I know we had a verdict, but I got a little bit behind. But I want to see all the BS and try to call the state out on all their stuff. So I'm going to be continuing that, as well as we're rewatching the Jodi Arias trial. But we also have the Black Swan murders coming up, or murder, which is what's her name? Ashley Benford, who is a ballerina out of Florida that's being accused of murdering her husband. That trial is starting soon, so I'm going to be doing a bunch of recaps and kind of catching up on that story over the next few weeks and doing that. So MLS Network.
All right, Chandler.
Yeah, I'm Chandler Remington. You can find me at Remy, REMY_legal on YouTube and on Twitter/X. And I'm going to be doing a, my regular weekly F-Feminism stream this night with Andrew Branca at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to talk about Russell Brand, Me Too, and we're going to talk about how women victimize themselves. I'm also going to be on Aussie Overlord's channel next week to talk about systemic misandry and some other topics related to that. Should be doing some stuff with legal vices soon. Yeah.
Steve.
All right, so I'm at Southern Law, and I did do a video earlier this week on this Odin thing because it was interesting to me. And if you want to hear my thoughts of it instead of reading 130 pages, you can. There's certainly other viewpoints. And then tomorrow I'll do the normal show on the weekly roundup.
Awesome. Kurt. Team Fire.
Yeah, Uncivil Law Hero. So I do a daily news roundup when I'm not doing other things. We've been doing the Ken Paxton impeachment trial a lot recently. And also this week, I did a read of the initial complaint in the case of Leah Remini versus Scientology with respect to harassment and other things that she's been alleging has been happening for numerous years. So a case I'm going to be trying to follow as it progresses, and what I'm sure will be a very long and slow slog, but should be fun. Also do just daily news roundup about things that are happening in the world, law cases that are happening, things that are interesting. Personal favorite this case this week was Judge Newman, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. Literally been there since they invented the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and she's having problems with her colleagues because they think she's too old and should leave, and she's like, no, I'm going to be here forever. So I've been covering that case because I think it's fun. And so you can tune into me at Uncivil Law, and that's what we cover. Fun.
Andrea.
I am A. Burkhart Law on Twitter and on YouTube. I'm way super behind on making videos on YouTube, but I am still spouting off a lot on Twitter when I have something to say. So that's honestly probably the best place to get my opinions on things. I am looking forward to October 3rd is the starting date for the first of the Marilyn Manson trials. This is a Jane Doe case. So it's not clear at this point how much of that process is going to even be available to the public. There's been some suggestion that this is going to be a closed trial, which is a whole disturbing implication in and of itself. But we had some big news this week that just excited me to no end, which is that Marilyn Manson has hired Dr. Elizabeth Loftus as his expert witness. If you have not heard of Dr. Loftus, check it out. She's got a great TED Talk on YouTube. She's featured in the Showtime series Buried. That's about the Eileen Franklin case, a very notorious case of repressed memories.
Back to Satanic Panic, she was involved with all that too, in exposing the McMartin case.
I know you're supposed to be doing your closeout now, but I can't. We interacted on this on Twitter.
Yes,
right?
we did.
Right. I watched her testify in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Okay. A lot of people found her compelling. I was laughing because at her testimony in this, and this is why, I understand that she's considered the expert in the field. That's almost certainly true. When you hear her testify on direct, she basically makes you feel as if every person's memory about anything that happened more than 13 seconds ago is completely assailable as being, and that, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I remember how I even got here. That's how when she's attacking memory, it's so broad and so global that I personally on direct didn't find her testimony to be that, she seemed really confident, but I just found it so overly broad that
Joe, I think you'd be shocked if you really look into memory research.
I understand over here. I'm going to let you finish it all.
Yeah. Because I think the issue is, with something like the Harvey Weinstein case, for example, a defense attorney who's looking for something to be able to take to the jury, they're going to conflate things like delayed reporting and false memory and stuff like that. And so just because her expertise may not particularly suit that case, from an objective standpoint,
Right.
that's a failure of defense counsel preparation, defense counsel construction of their case.
Okay.
So she's going to have to be broad in that type of situation, because that's what that case called for. There wasn't an issue of people claiming, I repressed memories. Well, in this Marilyn Manson case, we have like 5 different people who have come forward and claimed that for like a 10-year period, while they were still going to his concerts and hanging out and, all of this stuff, they had just somehow forgotten, they had repressed that he had committed these acts of rape against them. So it's squarely within her wheelhouse and all of the
Also
research that she's done on this topic. So I'm very excited about it for that reason.
Okay.
Andrea, I agree too.
Well,
also checklists, also coordination with the documentary, getting together in the room, which is part of her specialty, is that a lot of the satanic panic was from the psychiatrists and police questioning people and injecting memories into them, which is very on point with her specialty.
That is exactly what she did in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. That's exactly what she testified about.
And what I'm thinking we need to do is let Andrea finish off, and then me close, and then you can talk more about it, Joe, as long as you want.
So find me on Twitter and YouTube, and I'll be talking about those things.
Good idea. All right, Jeff, you're up.
We got some lighthearted stuff coming up. We're doing an unexplained show tomorrow morning about shortwave radio numbers channels.
Ooh, number stations.
So it's just people reading 8, 5, 4, 3, 6, 7.
Okay.
You can at least do
and I probably just resurrected a sleeper cell somewhere. Sorry about that. But those stations, what the numbers mean, what they are, et cetera, et cetera. Monday, Maritime Monday. As always, Tuesday is International Wrongful Conviction Day. So I'll be doing a stream with Chandler Remington and Solomon Anderson to talk about wrongful convictions.
All right. And as in tradition, we always let Joe go last so he can say who he is, where he's at, and get a final thought.
All right. Are you good, Jeff? We're good. You're good now.
Yeah, I got to say what I wanted to say. Go ahead. You got
I want to clarify my position that yes, when Dr. Loftus testifies, there's what she testifies about, the fact that there are repressed memories, the fact that the police can implant memories. That's definitely how she testifies, and she can be very compelling when she's talking. And at parts of her testimony, I was like, you know what, that makes total sense. And I think it's almost certainly true that when you're thinking about someone's memory, or someone's thinking back to something that happened 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago, it's very easy for if someone keeps suggesting the same thing over and over again.
False confessions. That happens yesterday.
That their memory gets flawed. And she talks about a car accident and people like having injected into them the wrong memory of that. I watched her testify. I mean, I sat there. I remember even where I was sitting when I was for that day of trial.
Are you sure you remember?
He's rewritten it in the retelling.
my point is that even though that certainly may be true, what I just felt as if the way she portrayed it just made it sound as if no testimony can ever be reliable, because anything that happened more than 10 minutes ago is what you're testifying about, and that's not, and that your memory can easily be sabotaged. And the other thing that I mentioned to you on Twitter was she got killed. It was in the Maxwell trial. So Ghislaine's family was sitting in the row directly behind the defense table, and you could see them in the backdrop on the video screen that was provided for us. And on cross-examination, when she was asked, didn't you testify for Harvey Weinstein also? That's what she was asked at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Mm-hmm. And the defense table jumped up screaming objection, but the implications were obvious. Like, you stand up for people who the public already accepts as being terrible human beings. So that's what your gig is. So as soon as she asked that question, they said objection, and the U.S. attorney said withdrawn. And I just saw like her family behind her just be like, oh God. Like it felt like the trial was over right then and there, because she was supposed to be their star witness. And I expect that. And I actually thought her career ended right there, because now the question becomes, didn't you testify for Harvey Weinstein and Ghislaine Maxwell? It's like the list just grows out more and more with every person who she testifies on their behalf and they get convicted. So, that's
the same argument, though, Joe. I mean, that's a very specious.
You're correct.
Stunt.
You're correct. You're correct. It is a specious stunt. That doesn't mean it's ineffective stunt.
Yeah, no, he's right. He's right about that. But that's an issue of preparation. That is defense counsel's job, to take the sting out of that type of information, to make sure that the jury understands this is who your witness is, this is what they do, this is who they do it for, and this is why they do it. I've seen her answer that challenge before, and she's got a very powerful answer where she says, look, I'm a scientist. I'm here to tell you about the science, and the science doesn't change depending on who's hiring me to tell it to you.
That's a great response. And my point is this: she may be the leading expert. She may, and I may agree. In fact, I do agree with a lot of what her position is, that a memory can be affected by third parties intentionally trying to affect your memory.
Or not intentional. Hold on. A lot of times it's not intentional. Yeah. That's part of the problem.
Okay. Whether it's intentional or not is really irrelevant. The point is that it can be affected by third parties so that you're not recounting things accurately. I agree with that totally. My point is, I don't know that she's quite as compelling as because of the way it comes across. Even if it's true, it doesn't mean it's compelling. And when you're looking at trial, what you care about is, how much is the jury going to accept as being truth versus how much of it is truth. That was my point there. Anyway, this is the sort of conversations I have on my show. I'm Good Logic. This is what I do. And if that's your deal, in that case, I urge you to make sure you follow me on Locals, which is goodlogic.locals.com. And on YouTube, and I'm also on Locals. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. That's goodlogic.locals.com. And yeah, I think that's good.
Oh, you're killing us. All right.